Hello, my friends. What a pleasure to see you today. Thank you for joining me for just a little bit of a conversation about the Tempest, Shakespeare's The Tempest. I hope that you will join me. I will be using this text. There's the text I'm working from. Can't get it in the frame because I don't know how to use the. And I'm going to share my screen so you don't have to look at me too much. All right. So The Tempest is most likely Shakespeare's final play. Certainly he did a little bit more writing, and the play The Two Noble Kinsmen probably came later, but who wrote all of it, or if it was even entirely written by Shakespeare, is still up for debate, or some people are still debating it. So it feels to me that The Tempest is a play where Shakespeare is trying to have a final word, where he's trying to suggest, as he suggested over the range of plays and poems, how we should behave toward each other, toward mystery, toward miracle, because he has choices, and the threads and themes of almost all the other plays come to fruition in The Tempest. It's a revenge play, like Hamlet. Now, Hamlet was nihilistic. There was everybody dead at the end, a pile of corpses. And so that was kind of the end of the revenge cycle for Shakespeare. This is how it ends. Everybody's dead. There's also marriage in here. The play was for Queen Elizabeth's marriage, and there's a lot of political undertones to what happens in the play. But a lot of other plays, like Midsummer Night's Dream, All's Well That Ends Well, etc., 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 end in marriages. Marriages become symbolic for unity for Shakespeare. Magic. Midsummer's Night's Dream, many other plays where there are these kind of mysterious, strange, mystical miracles, if you want to call them, and Shakespeare is wondering how we should interact with them, perceive them. So that appears in the play Father-Daughter, especially in Lear, this sense of how should Lear act toward his daughters and what is the relationship between fathers and daughters. So Prospero and Miranda in here are playing here. And in some ways, The Tempest has the opportunity to be any one of those plays. It could be a revenge, it could be a romance, it could be a comedy. There's lots of comedy going in here. Could even in some ways be a history play, you know, any of the histories. But what kind of play do we have? Let's switch the picture for a few minutes. We'll go back and forth. If we go to the very opening of the play, Act 1, Scene 1, Line 1. The first words are a direction to the stage manager. A tempestuous noise of thunder and lightning heard. Enter a shipmaster and boatswain. The first word is noise. The play opens with thunder and lightning, a ship being torn apart, people being severed. And then we learn about Prospero being severed from his home country, and Miranda being separated from her life, and Caliban being separated from the land. And the play opens with a series of separations, divisions, and noises. And if we rush all the way to the end of the play, I'm just setting you up some context here, it's music and hand-holding and chest playing and a marriage and freedom. Because in the opening parts of the play, everyone is asleep or awake. They're imprisoned or were imprisoned in a tree, for example. They are imprisoned by their desires, by their angers. There's a series of metaphorical and literal imprisonments that are balanced at the end of the play by freedoms. Prospero lets Caliban go, Prospero relieves Ariel, and then in his famous last line of the play, if you go to the end, Act 5, there's only one scene, Scene 1, just before the epilogue. I promise you, I'll deliver all, says Prospero, and promise you calm seas, suspicious gales, Freudian slip, I'll deliver all, and promise you calm seas, auspicious gales, and sail so expeditious that shall catch your royal fleet far off. Please, draw you near. So the beginning opens with this vision, this scattering across the island of all the major characters, and ends with the drawing near. So it's balanced in each act and each scene with these questions. And these questions come about in terms of, what kind of person will you be in the world? You've been hurt. You've almost been assassinated. You've been banished. You had to run away. You've been imprisoned by somebody else. How will you behave when you have the power? Each of us, the play seems to suggest, is at some point in our experience going to be a master. And at some point in our experience is going to be a slave or a servant. That there is this ebb and flow of power, and how you react as a servant. Miranda is a servant to her father. How should she behave? Ferdinand has to stack wood. How should he behave? You might be a slave to love, but you're still a slave. How are you going to behave? And then when you're a master, will you whip people or pinch them or drive them across the island into thorn bushes, or will you forgive them? Will you find a way to be generous and kind? So the play works on this interesting balance, an interesting question, and there are a lot of other questions in this play. But for my position anyway, the overarching theme seems to be, what should we do with ourselves? How should we treat each other? Will we be cynics or will we be good people? Will we find ways to assassinate and murder each other, as Caliban lists all the beautiful ways he can brain somebody? Or will we bring their hands together in marriage and find a way to create peace and music, which is a cultural representation of harmony, as opposed to noise, which is chaos and cannot be controlled? All right. I thought it was interesting, and I wanted to share with you that the play really does work with these pairings over and over and over again. Stefano and Trinculo are a pair. Ferdinand and Miranda are a pair. But there are also intellectual or imaginative pairs, like the calm and the storm, order and disorder, nature and art, reason and passion, innocence and experience. You get the idea. Some of them are larger and more profound. Some of them play out in more intricate ways than others, but the play is dominated by this duality of good and evil at its basic core, and how those are represented in many different pieces of language, many different ways of seeing them. Some of the easiest are to see who's asleep and who's awake, who's a drunk and who's not a drunk, who is kind and who is not kind, who is included, who is excluded. You get the idea. So as you're reading, or as you're going back and reviewing your notes, think a little bit about this duality and look for words that are repeated. Words like wonder and amazement and drunk and awake, and because these are how you approach Shakespeare's complicated texts, is his use of language and his layering of meanings. Each of the characters gets different acts that are exactly the same. For example, when Miranda sees Ferdinand for the first time, she is awestruck. She's like, wow, now there's a hunk. And Prospero's like, yeah, he's just an average dude, but I see where in your innocence, you see him as something pretty spectacular. Well, that scene is mimicked just a few scenes later when Caliban, who's drunk, falls in love with Trinculo, or is it Stefano? I think it's Trinculo, and says these things like, oh, you're so beautiful. Oh, I think you're a god. I really want to be your servant. I want you to be my master. It's exactly the same experience of being in love, but it's driven by different forces. In this case, Caliban is drunk, and in this case, Miranda is drunk with love, passion, the desire to connect, as opposed to the desire to serve. But love is a kind of service too. So as you're doing your reading and as you're thinking through your revisions of your annotations, you might pay attention to some of these. The other element that I think is fascinating in this text, there are many, many elements, but this is the other one I want to share with you, is the sense of listing. This is a bountiful island, and the play seems to conclude with the sense that we are so fortunate to have such abundance, such munificence. Now, some of the lists are of bad things that they're going to do, but there are so many choices. I just gathered some of the lists here, and some of the longer ones are when Caliban is telling Stefano all the wonderful things that can happen on the island, and when Prospero is listing Ariel's tasks. So you might want to think about those. Okay, I think that's probably more than you wanted to hear, but it is a starting point, an entrance into the play. I really thank you for joining me. I'm excited to see your work. As always, you're doing fabulously. Thank you very much, and we'll talk again soon. Bye now.